Okay, well, moving on then from Eurasia, and I'm sure I'm missing different things, but if I missed your favorite thing, bring it up in the question period, to the North American continent. And the North American continent is, I almost said similarly cursed like Europe, but that's just my prejudice. The North American continent is similarly poor in hallucinogens. There are no very interesting hallucinogens in North America, and North American Indians, North American culture, did not avail itself of this ecstatic plant-induced shamanism. It tended more to go for what's called ordeal shamanism, the Sundance thing where you hang yourself by your pectorals on hooks and stuff like that. I mean, there are other ways to attain these visions. But you see, that absence of good hallucinogens in North America just reinforced that whole beer and woolen and uptight thing that came from Europe. The only major hallucinogen to have a role in Native American culture is, of course, peyote. And many people, without informing themselves, imagine that peyote is something which goes millennia into the past, and this is absolutely not true. Peyote use may well be less than 1,000 years old among Native Americans. When you go back into the old graves and the old burial sites in the Rio Grande Valley and south, you don't find peyote. What you find are the beans of Sephora secundifolia. You all probably know this plant, though you may not know its name. It's the plant that produces the very hard red and black bean that they can string. If you all know what collarines are, these are erythrinas, which are related to these things. Okay, that stuff contains cytosine and cysteine. These are what are called ordeal poisons. And it might be worthwhile to just talk for a minute about ordeal poisons. I said there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to have this experience that shoves you through to an awareness of the numinous. That's what we're trying to do, is have an awareness of the numinous. Well, in certain parts of the world where hallucinogens were not present in the biome, people concentrated on ordeal poisons. And what an ordeal poison is it's a chemical compound that you take it and you think you're going to die and you beg for death and you do not die. You get better. You're fine. And you're so damn glad to be alive that you undergo an abreaction. You get straight. You shed some of your complexes and you turn over a new leaf. Is what it is. Well, in Madagascar, these ordeal poisons have been brought to a high state of perfection. Also in Malaya, there's a poison complex that replaces a hallucinogenic drug complex, and these are horrific poisons. So what apparently was going on in the Rio Grande Valley was, after centuries of this Sephora secundifolia cult, someone discovered peyote and said, "My God, thank God." And then the other plant which was big in the Southern California, northern Mexico, and across the Southwest were the tropane-containing daturas, the so-called Tolach religion of Southern California. Well, these are deliriant confusants that are, unless you have a psychic constitution that is not like mine, you can't take these things. They're I just found them confusing. It was like a kind of madness, and also physically very difficult to handle. I had a phase with these things when I was in Nepal, because there are sadhus, holy men in the Kathmandu Valley, who swear by this stuff. And if you're in Kathmandu, you may notice in the gutter, well, you'll notice plenty in the gutter, but you may also notice these datura pods empty datura pods, and I noticed them and started asking questions, and then out at the King's Game Preserve past Pashupatinath, I found a bunch of these things and laid in a supply. And but it is an occult, watery, it's a dimension of confusion, not a dimension of high awareness. And I think some of you have heard me tell the story about the reason I gave it up was an Englishman, a friend of mine who lived in this little village in Nepal where I lived. He was also experimenting with this stuff. And one day I was buying potatoes and tomatoes in the market, and I ran into him, and we started having a conversation. And in the course of the conversation, he revealed that he believed we were in his apartment. And then I knew that we were losing hold on our grounding. So I don't recommend that. I don't have a whole lot to say about it. Apparently, it's a thing for magic, power magic, and I've never been particularly interested in that because I'm afraid of it. I'm a watcher. I like to look. I like to get very close to it and watch it, but I'm not into grabbing it or doing anything with it. I have a feeling that would lead to catastrophe for me personally. Okay, where are we now? Northern Mexico. Now we've gone all around. We started in Europe, we went down into Africa, across the Eurasian continent, North America, northern Mexico. Now things get interesting, because as you leave the Sonoran uplands and go south, in the Sierra Mazateca, it is this mushroom complex, which Valentina and Gordon Wasson discovered in the 1953s. 17 to 22 species, it depends on who's counting, of extremely endemic, meaning very localized species of mushrooms, all producing psilocybin, coincident with the cultural site of the Mayan, Mixtec, and Mazatecan civilizations. And this is psilocybin, an extraordinarily powerful, visionary, and benign hallucinogenic metabolite. Once the Wassons had nailed down this Mexican mushroom complex, then people started checking, and they discovered these mushrooms or conspecific species in many localities. Two that are worth mentioning are the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia, which appears to be the world center for species density of the psilocybin gene, and strangely enough, very good ethnographic research turns up no hint that these Kwakiutl, Shimsham, Tlingit, and other people had any hint of this. They lived in the center of the psilocybin distribution complex, and as far as we can tell, their shamanism, which was highly evolved, never discovered or made use of this. Not so these civilizations of Mesoamerica. The other place where these mushrooms have now been discovered, and the range seems to be extending every year, is Europe. The tragedy of European civilization is that the logos was apparently there all the time. The English countryside, I understand, is now practically a scene of annual mushroom runs that are not unlike the lemming runs of Scandinavia, and everybody pours out to collect the semi-lanceata mushrooms. I've been told, I haven't been to these sites, but I've been told that Ionia, where the Book of Kells was composed and where St. Columba went, is covered with mushrooms. It's very clearly a mushroom ecology. Attention, graduate students, the tracing of mushroom motifs in European art and civilization and culture is an extremely rich, untapped field. If you need some clues, look at family escutcheons, look at family crests. In France and the Italian parts of France, the Morelli family has the Morel on their escutcheon. There are other mushroom families and mushroom names. So there may have been, this may have been the struggle between paganism and Christianity may have revolved around a mushroom. We know Druids were into plants. We know they were into oak groves, but the plant that is always mentioned as the Druidic psychic plant of choice is mistletoe. But mistletoe is chemically very disappointing. And I've wondered if mistletoe is not, it wasn't the plant they wanted to symbolize the symbiosis of one plant upon another. It's that the mistletoe symbolizes epiphytic existence. Anyway, this is an untapped area. Once you get into the New World tropics, then you are in the great domain of the hallucinogenic plants. And no one knows why it is that the tropics of the New World are tremendously rich in hallucinogens. I mean, I don't know how many of you are botanists or biologists, but try to imagine figuring out a set of evolutionary constraints that were operating on one side of the planet but not on the other. When we take, for instance, the jungles of southern Colombia and compare them with, let us say, the jungles of New Guinea, these are both continental floras, both equatorial, both climaxed at a species-rich climax, and one has dozens of hallucinogens in it, and the other has none. None. This is not well understood. I mean, theories range as wildly as, obviously, that South America must be where the flying saucer landed. And, that's where the genes were seeded. I confess I'm not sure why it is. At first I thought that it had to do with the extremely primitive state, so-called primitive, the extremely archaic state of culture in the South American jungles, that they represent a real Stone Age culture, where when you go into Indonesia, it may look primitive to you, but the Dutch were there before the English arrived in North America. It has had centuries and centuries in which these things could be forgotten. But of course, then come the botanists who care nothing for ethnographic data and who simply carry out plant surveys and chemical analysis of plants. They can't find these hallucinogens either. So this is a great mystery. In the tropics of Mesoamerica and the equatorial tropics of the New World, there's a vast panoply of hallucinogens, not only the mushroom complex, but then also this ayahuasca or yahe complex that we've referred to several times. This is a huge jungle vine. And as we cross into the yahe area, we also cross an interesting barrier, because we move from plants, single plants, which are hallucinogenically active, into the realm of preparations. We're on the threshold of the concept drug here, because what ayahuasca is two plants which are not active unless brought into combination with each other. One plant contains a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, and the other plant contains DMT, which would be destroyed in the gut if taken orally, unless it were taken orally in the presence of an MAO inhibitor. Well, this was not understood by Western pharmacology until 1956, but it was understood by Amazonian shamans millennia ago. So they bring these two things together, and by varying the ratio between the plant containing the beta-carbolines that inhibit MAO and the plants that contain DMT, they can intensify or de-emphasize the visions. Well, most of the Most of the hallucinogens in the Amazon basin run on tryptamine of some sort, usually DMT. In the upper basin of Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, like that, you get these yahe ayahuasca beverages. These are things you drink, and then it comes on. You have these outlandish trips. As you go down into the lower basin, the Banisteriopsis cult gives way to these snuff cults, Ibina and Niopo, depending on the languages. These don't depend on an MAO inhibitor for their activity because they're absorbed through the subnasal mucosa, which is an extremely effective way for getting drugs into the system. The problem with that complex, the snuff complex, is that we are just physically such delicate and wimpy people that we can't stand that route of drug administration, because what they do is they toast these seeds of Anodonanthera peregrina, this huge leguminous tree which is the source of the seeds. They toast these seeds and powder them, so what you get is a kind of rough cross between sawdust and charcoal, and then they have a hollow tube about this long, and they load it up with this stuff, and you squat down and put the tube into your nostril, and your friend, not you, because you would not do it hard enough. Your friend then takes a huge breath of air, and it's just like being hit in the face with a 2x4. I mean, it's like being hit in the face, and you fall over backwards, you scream, you salivate, you squirm around there in the dirt for a minute or two, and then you sit back up, and by that time, the tube has been reloaded for the other nostril. And then, and your eyes, your sinuses can't believe what's happening to you. So you have to sort out this whole sinus shock, which is going on in parallel with then an evolving strange state of mind, which is beginning to take over and clarify everything. And then there are numerous minor variations on these themes. Might talk just a little bit about the chemistry of these things and the chemistry of hallucinogens generally. My attitude toward this question of plants, compounds, drugs, should these things be used for spiritual growth? If the answer is no, then that finishes. You don't have to go any further. If the answer is maybe or yes, then other questions arise. Which compounds out of this whole survey, and at what frequency, and at what dosage, and under what circumstances? And over the years, I've sort of evolved a three-way test that I will share with you, because I think it's maybe operationally the most useful thing you'll hear this weekend. And that is, if you are contemplating some compound, some plant, then the first thing to ask yourself is, does it occur in nature? Does it have some tangentiality to what is already existing? Because obviously what exists, that's nature, has undergone some vast winnowing process out of the set of all things which might exist. In that wonderful phrase of Alfred North Whitehead's, certain things have undergone the formality of actually occurring. And so certain compounds have undergone the formality of actually occurring in the biological matrix, and so they should be our pool out of which our experimental compounds should be drawn. But this is thousands of compounds. How can we further narrow it? Well, an excellent way of narrowing it further is to ask the question of this compound: does it have a history of human usage? Does it have a history of human usage? That is your FDA approval. Because if you can point to a tribe of people who have been taking this plant or mushroom or whatever it is for millennia, and they don't have miscarriages, tumors, cataracts, blindness, Down syndrome, 8 fingers on the left hand, or whatever it is, then you can be fairly confident that this thing is benign, that these people have observed its action on pregnant women, the elderly, those with, and that it has passed that test. Then, finally, the narrowest gate through which a compound has to go to intersect my precious body is it has to have an affinity to ordinary brain chemistry. It has to have an affinity to ordinary brain chemistry. We don't want to launch something on your brain that it can't recognize at all, that it has no biosynthetic pathways to degrade, that it has no receptors for just some crazy thing, 5-amino-3-triethylphenthioanaxidine or something. We don't want that. There's not the spirit that we're acting in here. So if the compound can get through those 3 barriers, then it's an excellent candidate for providing spiritual gain at low physiological impact. Well, now some people may say, oh, well, you've taken all the fun out of it. All the good things have been tossed aside in this mad rush to purity or something. Not at all. The very best stuff was retained in this process because in terms of relative strength and bizarreness of effect and so forth, the strangest, the most powerful, the most transformative of all hallucinogens in nature or out is dimethyltryptamine, DMT. And it's worth talking about DMT for a moment because it will raise certain issues and distinctions that you may not have been aware of. First of all, DMT is hands down the most powerful of all hallucinogens. I mean, it is so powerful that whatever's in second place is lost over the horizon. Yet, it is the most benign of all hallucinogens because it occurs as an endogenous neurotransmitter in the normal human brain. Every single one of us at this moment have N,N-dimethyltryptamine being synthesized, activated, and degraded in our synaptic membrane. So this is almost a paradox. The most benign of all hallucinogens, the most fast-acting, I should also add, is also the most harmless, the easiest to take. It sort of puts a certain obligation on the experient because there is no reason to hold back except that there is this question, does it drive you mad? And then the more serious version of that question, what about the possibility of death by astonishment? This is no joke. Death by astonishment is, I think, probably the major risk we run with this stuff because the impact of the breakthrough is so total, so complete, so unexpected. And in a way, this sort of brings me back around to my theme because I encountered DMT, LSD, all of these things in that very period when I was getting set to take flight as a Jungian analyst. And what completely blew my mind about DMT, and I mention it again, here's an opportunity for research, is how here's a heretical construction, how trans-archetypal the content of the flash seemed. I was appalled because not only had I a certain amount of interest in Jung and proclivity along those lines, but my original major had been art history. art historians, what we're trained to do is to be able to look at a motif and say, oh yes, I'm familiar with this from ceramic from second millennia Peru and also Mandaean embroidery work. We know motifs. We're trained to recognize and connect disparate aesthetic domains. Well, when I smoked DMT and came down, I said, this is not on the map. I can't believe it. This doesn't connect up to anything. How can there be domains of the human mind that do not announce themselves in folklore, fairy tales, dreams, or mandala painting, that are so removed from the ven of what is human that they are apparently not accessible in structuring our maps of ourself and our psyche? And that for me was the contact with what I call, and I didn't call it this, Rudolf Otto called it this, and this term influenced Jung, Otto preceded Jung, it is the wholly other. And if there is an archetype of the wholly other, then this is it. But perhaps the wholly other transcends the archetypes. This may explain to some degree Jung's interest in Gnosticism, especially the Valentinian school of Gnosticism, which holds, that there is a higher and hidden Father, all God, who is outside the machinery of cosmic fate. And it seemed to me that in those extremely profound DMT flashes, I was actually witnessing a domain outside the machinery of the archetypes, which is, for us as moderns, that's what the machinery of fate is. It's not zodiacal machinery. It's hardwiring in our psychology and our genes that gives us our fate. Well, so having said that, I've not only made the survey, but also brought us to, by ending with DMT, the subject matter of this quest. And I want to make it clear, I speak about the power of the psychedelic experience because I think people should be informed of their birthright. And I feel very antsy around the notion that someone might go from birth to the grave without ever having a psychedelic experience. It makes me as antsy as the notion that somebody might go from birth to the grave without having a sexual experience. It's a strange kind of protective denial, or a kind of expression of fear. This is our birthright. This is part of what it means to be human. These altered states of consciousness, I think, are pretty much scripted into the existence of women because most of them will give birth, which is an organically scripted psychedelic experience from which there is no escape unless, of course, you go for the drug knockout, the spinal, and then you miss everything. But biologically, physiologically, women are set up for this experience. Men are not. It's possible to build such barriers against overwhelmment that it never happens in your whole life. And I believe that if we psychologically analyze the effects of these psychedelics, what they do is they dissolve boundaries. That's all. I mean, if you interview 10,000 people who've had a psychedelic trip, each one has their own hierophany, their own hieroskamos that unfolded for them, but the sum total of it is boundaries dissolve, and then whatever's on the other side of your boundary comes flooding in to claim you and to reshape and remake your psyche. Well, I see the entire illness of our civilization as an ego-inflationary illness. We have gone so sick with ego that we are literally murdering the planet rather than confronting the consequences of our psychic imbalance. And the psychedelics act to redress this. They are almost an inoculation against the ego. And I see the ego as a phenomenon arising in historical time, or rather, actually, history is caused by the ego. But the ego is a component of the psyche that arose in the post-archaic phase, in the post-psychedelic phase. It's entirely a modern invention. It's less than 15,000 years old. And the assumptions of the ego are the source of our neurosis, our disequilibrium. Why did the ego arise? It arose because of the climatologically enforced abandonment of these psychedelic religions of the archaic period. In other words, here is the scenario as I see it. Primates, even primitive, even non-advanced primates like squirrel monkeys, howler monkeys, these kinds of primates, all have male dominance hierarchies. The whole thing with primates is about male dominance. But a lot of things about human beings mark us as the most unique member of the primate group. Obviously, we look different from any other monkeys. Even the stranger monkeys look more like the normal monkeys than we look like them, or they look like us. Our upright posture. The other thing about us is our suppressed estrus cycle. We cannot tell at a glance whether a woman is in heat or not. And yet, obviously, that had a tremendous shaping force on the social psychology of the primates. I believe that everything about us that is noble and worth saving occurs against the grain. That if we had followed the grain, we would still be competing with jackals for the carcasses left by lions of large game kills on the plains of Africa. But when the African continent began to dry up and we were forced out of the trees where we had an arboreal vegetarian lifestyle, we came under great pressure to expand our diet. And I believe that the great unstudied factor in human evolution and human emergence is the effect of a complex diet on our emerging species. And it's not only the presence of hallucinogens such as psilocybin in the diet, but other things as well. Psilocybin is the most spectacular case, and if you came to see Darwin, you'd have to hear about evolution. So you came to see me, so you have to hear this little theory about human emergence. Most of you can probably recite it by heart now. But it's a three-step feedback loop from a fairly bright monkey to a fairly stupid human being. And the way it works like this. These monkeys come down out of the trees. They're predating on kills of ungulate mammals made by lions. They're competing with jackals. They're testing all the foods in the environment. And lo and behold, in the manure of these ungulate mammals that are irradiating across the African continent, there are what are called coprophytic mushrooms. And the presence of large amounts of tryptophan in manure as a substrate means that these coprophytic mushrooms elaborate psilocybin. So here in this new grassland environment are the psilocybin mushrooms. Well, these proto-hominid creatures testing foods for their diet would reach the psilocybin and would test it. Well, then this three-part feedback loop to humanness then comes into play. And it works like this. Very, very light doses of psilocybin, so light that you cannot an hour and a half or 2 hours later tell you've taken anything. You say, I don't feel it, I feel completely normal, I must not have taken enough. That dose, if you would submit yourself to being tested by an optometric apparatus, we could show you that your vision has improved slightly. This is an effect of eating small amounts of psychoactive amines, increase of visual acuity. Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that if you're a hunting animal competing in a highly competitive environment and suddenly somebody hands you a pair of chemical binoculars, you are going to be a more successful hunter than other members of your species who are not availing themselves of this food item. So there was reinforcement there. Aha, if we eat these mushrooms in small amounts, we will be more successful hunters. Or maybe it was never raised to consciousness as an if-then relationship. It was just, we eat mushrooms, we hunt well kind of thing. Then, if you eat slightly more of the psilocybin, if you bring slightly more of it into your diet, it's what's called a CNS stimulator, central nervous system stimulant. An effect of all CNS stimulants is what's called arousal. And arousal means simply that you can't sit still, you're very restless, you're very energetic, and often in the male animal you have an erection. It's an overall systemic arousal. And if you witness this situation in monkeys are very hang loose kind of characters, and so then they just all fall together in a heap and make love. And this increases what anthropologists and primatologists like to call successful instances of copulation. This means that this increased interest in sex, in combination with an increased success in obtaining food, is creating the perfect situation in which there will be a population boom of these creatures. They're eating better, they're enjoying themselves more, and they have better relationships with each other. So population boom is on the way. Well then, the next and final level is when you raise the dose higher, so you're no longer restless or interested in sex or any of that, but you're flattened with the ecstatic unfolding of the full, numinous, hallucinogenic rupture of plane, then, and this occurs, in the tribal context, then there is boundary dissolution, group sexual activity, and group bonding and identification. And this is where this telepathic coherence, this inner dynamic of cohesion and caring that we see in primitive people to some small degree, and that we imagine must once have been our birthright, this is where it came to be. And at those higher levels of psilocybin, most of you probably know, language is formed by an organ on one side of the brain called Broca's area. Broca's area, the brain being always symmetrically constructed, Broca's area has a twin on the opposite side of the brain, but no one knows what's going on there. It's apparently a silent area of the brain. Well, when you take psilocybin, there is spontaneous linguistic activity, glossolalia. Henry Munn has written about this in his essay, The Mushrooms of Language. It's almost as though psilocybin is a pheromone that promotes linguistic activity, an effort to take verbal intentionality and connect it up to the ontos of being in some way. And then it's almost as though words are born out of you. You give birth to words. And these concrescences of meaning then create a kind of unitary ambiance which we call understanding. Language is a miracle. I mean, make no mistake about it. I don't think any amount of dissection of monkeys or human cadavers will give you any insight into language. Language is a behavior of some sort, so bizarre, so many orders of magnitude more complex than anything else we do, that for all practical purposes, this is the thumbprint of God upon creation. Human language. And it's a self-transforming thing. It keeps bootstrapping itself to higher and higher levels, and it creates for us the entire ambiance of reality. Once we had words, we quickly replaced reality with them. And so I believe that what psilocybin promotes is cognitive activity, the coordination of visual input with plans and strategies for hunting or acquisition or whatever. It promotes this increased arousal, which really, in a way, we as moderns are absolutely as in awe of as our mushroom-munching ancestors 25,000 years ago. We can't reduce it. We don't know what it is. You know, Jung was always so concerned that people say it's only psychological, it's only the psyche. I've got news for you. It may only be the psyche, but the psyche is all there is. And as we came into a relationship with the mushroom, humanness emerged on the African belt and was able to stabilize itself for a few millennia, and then we fell into history because of climatological change, for many reasons, but we literally fell into history. And now we operate in this lower domain, a domain of limitation, of misunderstanding, of low-grade languages, and we are neurotic, we are unhappy, we are dysfunctional, and I believe this is because our connection to the logos, to the informing voice that gives meaning to being, has been broken. Over 10,000 years, it's fallen away. And all we're left with is our spiritual yearnings, our nostalgia for paradise, and our pathologies. And, miraculously, we are left with the time capsule of preservation represented by the rainforest shamanic cultures that use hallucinogens. There lies our answer, but it's like the Ouroboros serpent taking its tail in its mouth. The salvation of the super future of the planet lies in a recovery of the values, modalities, and religious practices of 25 to 50,000 years ago. Break, break, break.